Herzlich willkommen. Hallo, welcome, shalom, assalamu alaikum. Parataxe Symposium Nummer 7, NahostBerlin, die Literarische Middle East Union. So haben wir unser heutiges Symposium benannt. Was das bedeutet, wird sich im Laufe des Tages noch herausstellen. Ich freue mich über alle hier im Saal und natürlich auch die Zuschauer im Internet. Die Parataxe ist eine Serie, die sich diesen Namen gegeben hat, weil Parataxe in der Literaturwissenschaft bedeutet ein Gefüge von gleichberechtigten Hauptsätzen. Wir meinen damit die Sprachen, die in dieser Stadt, die in diesem Land gesprochen werden. Wir wollen darauf schauen, dass Gegenwartsliteratur heute in Berlin, in Deutschland, eben nicht nur in deutscher Sprache, sondern in über 100 Sprachen entsteht. Seit 4 Jahren erkunden wir die Literaturszenen Berlins mit ihren verschiedenen Sprachen und immer schon seit 2017 hatten wir vor, auch mal die hebräischsprachige, sehr lebendige Szene Berlins zu erkunden, aber auch die arabischen Schriftsteller dieser Stadt mal näher zu betrachten. Vor ungefähr einem Jahr kam dann von Mati Shemoelof und von Hila Amit der sehr interessante Hinweis, dass man diese beiden Sprachgruppen doch vielleicht auch gemeinsam präsentieren könnte. Das fand ich sehr ungewöhnlich, auch sehr überraschend. Und dann haben die gesagt, ja, Berlin ist der Ort, an dem arabische und hebräische Autoren sich seit langem schon in einer literarischen Szene miteinander vermengen. Das fand ich so aufregend, dass ich gesagt habe, okay, lasst uns gemeinsam ein solches Symposium machen, in dem wir diesen Szenen, diesen Literaten nach und auf den Grund gehen. Die Berliner Literarische Aktion, die die Parataxe veranstaltet, ist seit genau 15 Jahren, existiert sie, 26.11.2005, auf den Spuren der vielsprachigen Literatur Berlins. Das hat damit zu tun, dass schon bei unserer Gründung ein typisches Berliner Literatengemisch dabei war, eine kurdische Schriftstellerin, eine französischsprachige Schweizerin, Literaturwissenschaftlerin, eine italienische Übersetzerin und so weiter. Also dieses Sprachgemisch, das Berlin ausmacht, macht auch die Berliner Literarische Aktion aus. Heute werden wir 2 bis 3 Sprachen vor allen Dingen hören. Das erste Panel, das wir jetzt gleich hören werden, findet in Englisch statt. Die nächsten beiden Panels, die dann um 16 Uhr und um 19.30 Uhr stattfinden werden, sind in deutscher Sprache. Jetzt gleich werden wir allerdings auch ein bisschen Arabisch dazu hören. Es gibt eine Dolmetscherin und dieses Arabisch wird dann ins Englische, was die Konferenzsprache des jetzigen Panels ist, übersetzt werden. ANU heißt der Verein, der jüdische und arabische Schriftsteller in dieser Stadt vereint. Mati und Hila, die ihr gleich noch kennenlernen werdet, sind die Protagonisten dieses Vereins, mit dem wir dieses wunderbare Projekt zusammen geplant haben. Das LCB ist unser langjähriger Partner, als Ort dieser Symposien ganz hervorragend geeignet und unser guter Partner seit vielen Jahren. Und natürlich muss ich auch erwähnen, den Kultursenat von Berlin, der dieses ganze Projekt seit vielen Jahren mit einer Förderung überhaupt ermöglicht. Das ist natürlich großartig. Was wichtig ist für dieses Symposium zu wissen, außer diesem Stream gibt es auch noch eine Webseite auf stadtsprachen.de, unserem Online-Literaturmagazin. Im Netz kann man auch jetzt schon verschiedenste Texte, Übersetzungen und Videos, Beiträge zum heutigen Symposium mit- und nachlesen. Also wer auf stadtsprachen.de geht und den entsprechenden Links folgt, kann dort ein reichhaltiges Hintergrundmaterial zum heutigen Tag finden. Mehr davon wird auch nach dem Event dann noch online gestellt, Fotos, Audios und auch Manuskripte und Übersetzungen. Ich freue mich jetzt, der Stream wird in 3 Teile geteilt, das heißt, jetzt haben wir das erste Panel, 16 Uhr, 19.30 Uhr gibt es weitere Streams. Ich bedanke mich schon jetzt bei allen, die dieses Event, dieses Symposium möglich gemacht haben und wünsche uns allen eine spannende Entdeckungsreise ins NahostBerlin der Jetztzeit. Und ich übergebe jetzt das Wort an Jürgen Jakob Becker vom Literarischen Kolloquium Berlin. Herzlich willkommen.
Ja, herzlich willkommen auch von mir hier im Literarischen Kolloquium. Wir streamen vom Wannsee aus. Eigentlich hätte dieses Symposium schon im Mai stattfinden müssen. Aus den bekannten Gründen musste es verschoben werden. Heute sagten wir aber, ziehen wir das durch. Wir haben die technischen Möglichkeiten geschaffen und freuen uns, dass es jetzt endlich möglich ist. Wenn man irgendwann einmal die Sozialgeschichte der Literatur Berlins zu Beginn des 21. Jahrhunderts schreiben wird, dann wird die Mehrsprachigkeit, die Präsenz der internationalen Autorinnen und Autoren hier in dieser Stadt eine große Rolle spielen. Und ganz besonders dynamisch haben sich in den letzten Jahren die Communities entwickelt, die Hebräisch schreiben oder auch Arabisch schreiben. Der Senat von Berlin vergibt seit einigen Jahren Stipendien an fremdsprachige, an anderssprachige Schriftsteller in dieser Stadt. Und großes Bewerbungsaufkommen kommt immer aus diesen beiden Sprachen, Hebräisch und Arabisch. Die Middle East Union ist ein interessantes Projekt, erstmal eine fixe Idee einiger Leute, aber vor 2 Jahren haben wir schon eine Veranstaltung hier gemacht, die so die ersten Fühler ausgestreckt hat, und wir sind froh, dass wir das heute vertiefen können. Ich möchte Sie auch hinweisen auf literaturport.de, unsere Website, die auch die Writers at Berlin, so nennt sich dieser Bereich, erkundet. Es gibt dort sowohl zu dem arabischsprachigen Berlin als auch zu dem hebräischsprachigen Berlin interessante Erkundungen und Plätze und Hintergrundinformationen, die ich Ihnen ans Herz legen möchte. Ich wünsche uns einen wunderschönen, spannenden, langen Streaming-Tag. Wir haben 3 Panels und ich übergebe jetzt an Mati. Vielen Dank.
Hila Amit.
Salam alaikum, willkommen, shalom, וברוכים הבאים. We are gathered here today in a bit of a weird format due to the coronavirus. Some of you are in Germany, and some of you are watching us from all over the world, we hope. We wanted to have many people here to sit together, talk, exchange ideas, views, beliefs, and literary pieces. But instead, our world has become even more segregated. People are farther away, and all of this seems very depressing. But I want to encourage us all, those here with us today and those who are at home, I would like to encourage us all to take part in this important conversation we are having here. We are happy to take questions from the people at home during the event, and we would try to do our best to incorporate the discussion with the people at home, so that you could all engage with us and share your thoughts. Please, to send us questions, check in the Facebook page of Stadtsprechen.de and write those questions down. First of all, I would like to introduce Anu. We are a small team of Arab Jewish writers living in Berlin. We aim to bring together Jewish and Muslim authors and poets with heritage stemming from the Middle East, Asia, and North Africa. We want to revive the lost Jewish-Muslim dialogue through literature and art. We have created a few events in the past, and we welcome you to follow our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to get more information on our future events. We also want to thank our partners at the Berlinische, Literarische Aktion and Parataxe, and our partners at the Literaturport, with the sponsor of the Berlin Senate for Culture in Europe, who made it possible to gather here today and who supported this event even through this global pandemic. We also wish to thank the LCB, who are hosting us today for the second time, an event by Anu. You've showed us a lot of generosity always. What is the plan for today? Our symposium, Parataxe Symposium VII, NahostBerlin, the Literary Middle East Union, seeks to illuminate the existing, evolving, and reviving meeting points of Middle Eastern and German culture. More specifically, it seeks to highlight the city of Berlin and its vivid cultural scene as a manifestation of the coming together of the diverse Middle Eastern cultures. Over the course of a whole day, and within the framework of 3 panels, we want to outline the contours of the Middle East Union in the literary world. We have a set of 3 different panels bringing together diverse voices and diverse poetics. Our first panel, titled Nationalism, Kaputt, Muslim and Jewish Poetic in the Diaspora, deals with the moment of departure from the national project in the Middle East and the immigration to Berlin. Guiding questions will regard what we created here in the diaspora. Are we, Arab and Jews who left the Middle East, creating Middle Eastern poetics from the diaspora, or is our cultural product disconnected from the cultural and national project we've left behind? The participants of this panel are Asaf Dvori, Hasan Ze Alnoon, Mariam Rasheed, and myself. In the second panel, titled Middle East Berlin, we want to examine the impact of Middle Eastern cultures on the German culture, especially with regards to the city's own history of a wall of separation. We as Jews have a wall separating us from our Arab past, and in Israel we have a wall separating us from our Palestinian neighbors. How has the city of Berlin influenced the Middle Eastern culture that live within and vice versa? How does the Middle East culture influence and revitalize the Berlin culture? Our panel will include a keynote by Zakaria Kasalinki and a discussion with Abdulkadir Musa, Tali Okavi, Mati Shemoelof, and Afshin Javadi. Our reading event concluding our symposium is titled Was sprach du in? German Jews meet Arab Jews, and is meant to shed a light on the encounter of German Jews and Arab Jews by examining their literary and poetic world. In doing so, we will ask whether two sides of the same culture, religion, and tradition connect. It will begin with a keynote by Tal Hever-Chybowski and will follow by a reading of literary works by Anna Shapiro, Muna Yehia, Esther Dischereit, and Zehava Khalfa. We hope you, our viewers from Berlin and maybe from other places, will enjoy the event and participate in the discussion. We are happy that even within this global situation, we are still able to find space and time for literature and discussion. And we hope to continue this discussion with the participants and with the audience over our social media. Stay healthy, stay sane, and let's begin with our first panel.
The title of our first panel is Nationalism Kaputt, Muslim and Jewish Poetics in the Diaspora. Back in our homelands, the Israeli national establishment, as well as the Arab nations, are constantly trying to strengthen the national identity. Culture is one of the important components in the creation of nationalism. But when people emigrate, suddenly nationalism has no grip on its citizens. Now, what is created here with our cultural freedom? Here in Berlin, I have a chance to decide which news to read. Should I read the news from Israel, from Berlin, from Germany, or from the Middle East? If I will not open the Israeli news, I will be completely outside of the Israeli politics and culture. But what happens when I don't read the news from Israel? Do I feel lighter? Can I be, for one moment, out of the conflict or inner debates of the Israeli society? I was an Arab Jew in Israel, with family roots in Baghdad, Mashhad in Iran, Damascus in Syria, and we weren't included in the Israeli society as well as the Jews from European region. So what does this luggage do to my writing once meeting people from the other side of Berlin? I ask myself sometimes, do we, Arab and Jews, who left the Middle East, create some new diasporic poetics in Berlin? But how does it look like? Are the diasporic poetics completely disconnected from the Middle East and the national project that we left behind? I mean, is it a post-national project? Am I free from my Israeli subjectivity? Or is everything here is shaped by my Hebrew background? I will give you an example. Do I look at the Zutstern Church in Neukölln, where I live, in the same way as the Arab migrant? In both our homelands, Christians are the minority. Now we are mutually looking at the Christian host majority culture in Germany that has little to do with our own. Suddenly, our own background have even more in common than they had in places where we came from. We also both desperately search for good hummus places in Berlin. We try to find the few shops where they sell arak or sesame pasta, for which in Hebrew word tehina and in Arabic word tehin, sometimes melt into one. And when I hear Fogel Nahal from a car radio passing by, my heart jumps in recognition of the sound that my grandmother used to play in her kitchen. Going back to our panel, we asked our participants to similarly think about this context of intercultural encounter. We looked for the intimate identity touch from their specific memories and upbringing. So how do we experience the German culture? Am I equally welcome as a Jew from Israel to Germany as the Arab and Palestinian writer? And do we really meet here in Germany? How do we meet? Do we talk about the conflict? Or do we avoid it? I like to talk about my Baghdadi roots to those from Iraq or Syria or other Arab places. But maybe this is also how I avoid talking to them about Israel. What is created in this tectonic moment, in this tectonic encounter of East and West? We have 4 participants: Mariam Rasheed, Hasan Ze Alnoon, Asaf Dvori, Hila Amit Abbas, and our featured poet Afshin Javadi Torshizi. Before we start, I would like to remind those who are you watching us on the social media that you can take part in our event with questions and comments for the panel via stream and on Stadtsprechen Facebook page, as it is written and linked in our event page. Our social media editor, Simon, will collect the answers and comments during the event and bring them into discussion on the last 10 minutes. And let me introduce our first panelist, first participant, Mariam Rasheed. Mariam Rasheed is an artist and a spoken word poet from Alexandria, Egypt. Since October 2015, she lives in Berlin, where she is currently studying at a technical university. For her, art and literature are much more than a form of expression and a way to survive. They are an integral part of her identity. Please.
Thank you so much. I'm very honored to be here, and I'm very excited. When I first heard about the name of the panel, Nationalism kaputt, I thought, isn't that a good thing? This is what my initial thought. I was like, yeah, that's good, right? Because, I mean, nationalism brings about so much harm to this world, and I thought, maybe that's not a bad thing after all. But then I thought about why we need nationalism. And I don't think it's an organic feeling, really. I think it's something that we develop the need for just because our world is so corrupt and so intolerant. I think our world is kaputt, and this is why we need nationalism. But I tapped into that, and I thought, what is nationalism to me? How do I discover my national identity? How do I work with that? How do I deal with it and navigate it? And I kept thinking, what would people associate with me? And I think there's so many things coming from Egypt. I mean, I'm Arab, I'm Muslim, I'm Middle Eastern, also Near Eastern, which are kind of the same, but not really. I'm North African, and sometimes not African, but sometimes African, because sometimes North Africa and the rest of Africa are seen are like South America and North America, which is not the case because they're one continent. They're not like the Americas, 2 separate continents. They're one continent, but at the same time, I feel a lot of people just like kind of exclude North Africa from Africa. And I thought, wow, those are so many identities. How do I like cope with that? And it's so crazy because I lived in Egypt up until I was 18. And then to me, discovering my identity was not contextual. It was just, I was there. It was not put in a context. It was just discovering me and tapping into my family, our heritage, our traditions, and our culture. But now, when I've kind of left this space, this kind of safe place, I had to put it in a context. And then with this context come all these weird labels, and I didn't know how to deal with these labels. So yeah, I wrote kind of 2 poems to navigate that feeling, and I would like to share them with you now. The first poem is tapping into my identity in a context, and then the other is just like stripped of everything around it. So it's just like a girl coming from Alexandria just dealing with that. So yeah, the first poem, they both have very long titles, which is kind of funny because all the poems I wrote before had 1 or 2 word titles, and I felt this is how it should be. But then I gave myself the freedom and the space to kind of just come up with longer titles, and I think I kind of abused that freedom. But I think that's the case with most of the things we allow ourselves, I guess. So yeah, the first title is called I Took a Seat at the Table with the Assigned Name Tags. I once Googled the Middle East and found my grandfather's fingerprints on the sweet potatoes he baked for me. I once Googled the Near East and found a trail leading me back to my great-great-grandmother. I come from neither and both. I'm at the end of a trail of women who had to be beaten so I can hear this heartbeat, at the beginning of a trail that lies north of the color blue, cold in its warm environment, west of the Strip, east of what now? Of oil, sweet in its crudeness, of blood? East is a relativity. I'm a future of the trail positioned, the hope for it to be unplaced. So that was the first one. If you didn't get it, it's very visual, it's very geographical. So Egypt lies northern to Sudan, which is the blue in the poem, west of the Gaza Strip in Israel, which is the Strip, and east to Libya, which is the sweet oil. Yeah, so I hope for those of you who didn't get it, now they do. And yeah, like I said, I have another poem that kind of just explores my identity, stripped of all these things, stripped of its geographical location, stripped of what people think of it, how people view it, and just like tapping into what I really identify as. And I wrote this poem after a conversation I had with a friend of mine. He's my best friend, and he comes from Lebanon, and he lives from Beirut, and he lives in Paris. And he was in Beirut, and I was in Alexandria, both visiting our parents. That was the beginning of this year in March, before hell broke loose. and we were talking about our cities and how it feels like just returning to them, and just like for a week, just being there visiting, and how we're regarded as visitors and not really as a part of that community anymore. But still, we come back because we do feel we still belong. We still want to feel like we do, but then we get all these questions and statements thrown at us like, oh, Paris changed you so much, or Berlin changed you so much, and you're not like how you were, or like, I don't know, act like the place you come from, whatever that means. And so after this conversation, which went to like 6 a.m, he went to sleep, and I thought, you know what, it's fine, it's late anyway, or early in that sense, and I thought I would write a poem. And like I said, it also has a very, very long title. It's called To a Place I Was When the Sun Was Drawn on the Upper Left Corner of a Paper. The city I grew up in is feminine and formidable. She scrubs the dirt off the architecture she fought hard to reclaim to be hers. The city I grew up in is manly and kind. She's the old Nubian making his way along the corniche selling rose cotton candy. I left the city I grew up in, and I learned to hate her in a foreign language, one she won't understand, and I learned to say I love her with my eyes closed and my heartbeat slowing. I learned to say I love her and I hate her in the same breath. My tongue is infected with a string of letters that spells her name backwards. Sometimes all a mind needs to do is break things down and put them back into order, but how can it teach herself structure when it lies anchored to her mess? On most days, the city I grew up in looks like death. with a heart heavy and eyes full of tears, and I need to remember I'm alive. So I build myself a grave using stones I collected from all the streets that split her open on most days. The city I grew up in looks like death, but on others, she smells like hope. I read before that if you repeat something often enough, it loses its meaning. I hummed her name 100 times, crying myself to sleep. She did not lose her meaning, and still the city occupies the space between my breasts and the sighs between my breaths, and I find myself forced to call her lover. I still left. The city I grew up in is salt water and palm trees. She's Friday noon prayer and the smell of pita bread. But really, the city I grew up in is poverty and fear and hunger and filth. She's a dystopia spreading her legs in a brothel only waiting to be fucked. The city I grew up in is injustice, miseducation, classism, and hurt. But really, the city I grew up in no longer exists. So that was the second poem. And yeah, when I wrote that, I was like really tapping into my identity, and I thought I would really like my identity to not have anything with my heritage. I felt, because I was back home, and like I said, I got all these comments, I felt like I just wanted to rid myself of all of that and just like live void of it. And I realized that, like, okay, fine, if I want to pursue that, what other identities will I, like, identify with? Maybe being an artist, maybe what I'm studying, which is chemical engineering, like an engineer, whatever that is. And I thought, okay, so if I pursue this identity of an artist and just that, nothing else, not Middle Eastern, not Muslim, not Egyptian, not Arab, what does that make me? And then I thought, my art doesn't exist without all these other identities existing. So I kind of need them. I kind of need them to be, but I also kind of need them for my art, which is the thing that I want to be. So yeah, whether nationalism is kaputt or not, I don't really have an answer for that. But I guess this was my way of exploring that title and that name of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And now let me introduce to you Hasan Ze Alnoon. The poet Hasan Ze Alnoon was born and raised in Syria. He studied law with a focus on international law at Damascus University. He received a ban on reading, writing, and publishing due to the often critical political nature of his poetry. He took part in the peaceful revolution of 2011 in Syria and experienced its brutal repression by the Assad regime. After his arrest, he fled the country to Germany. The main themes of his poetry are the dictatorship, the desire for freedom, the destruction of Syria, and love. He has performed in events in Berlin, at the Autor Theater in Potsdam, and elsewhere in Europe, in Sweden and in Finland, with organization Storytelling Arena. His first volume of poetry in German will be published this year or maybe next year, I guess. His poetry brings together two seemingly contrary elements, a political and romantic voice. I have to add that his interpreter today is Nicola Abbas. First, we will hear 2 minutes from Hasan in Arabic, and then we will hear Martin Jankowski in English reading his statement of Hasan. Thank you. Please, Hasan. Tfadal.
Thank you very much, Mati and Hila and Mariam. Thank you. I will speak Arabic, yes. عندما كنت في دمشق كنت شاعراً ممنوعاً من الكتابة. أمارس الشعر كما يمارس المراهقين العادة السرية خلف الأبواب المغلقة. كنت أكتب الشعر في زمن القوميات المنحطة والمحنطة وعهد الدكتاتوريات التي ما زالت إلى يومنا هذا تفتح أبواب معتقلاتها للشعراء والكتاب وطلاب الحرية. كنت أكتب الشعر وأنا أحمل قلبي بين يدي وأمشي به ما بين الألغام. أعترف لكم بأنني قادم من بلاد تتآكل، قادم من بلاد مشتعلة تأكلها النيران. ولكي أكون أكثر دقة، أنتم الآن أمام ما تبقى مني حياً بعد خروجي من تلك الحرائق ومن تلك المجزرة. وأنا هنا اليوم في برلين لا بد لي من أن أعترف بأنني أحمل معي الكثير من الندوب والنيران التي لم تنطفئ بعد، وأعمل اليوم جاهداً عن طريق الشعر والأدب على إخماد ما حملته معي من حرائق ما زالت تنهش جسدي وخريطتي الشعرية. عندما كنت في فيينا قبل 5 سنوات طلبوا مني مغادرة المدينة أو قاموا بترحيلي، كتبت هذه الأبيات: ربما كنت شاعراً مشتعلاً تتهاوى القذائف من قلم الرصاص الذي أكتب به، أو لربما كتبت في إحدى بارات سالزبورغ بيتاً من الشعر المفخخ، أو كان المناخ الشعري في حي شتيفنبلاتس أرق من أن يتحمل أحزاني وجراح قصائدي وضجيج مفرداتي، فقرروا ترحيلي إلى أبعد مدينة خارج المدينة، إلى برلين. برلين أعطتني أبجديتها الملونة، ولم تسألني عن جنسيتي أو خلفيتي الدينية، ولم تناقشني بطريقتي الشعرية. فتحت لي أبواب الشعر والقوافي ورمتني على الورق الأبيض، وجلست في آخر السطر تنتظر القصيدة. شكرا لكم. Danke.
Shukran. Martin Jankowski, please, reading the statement of Hasan.
Hasan Ze Alnoon. 5 years ago in Damascus, I was a poet who was forbidden to write. I practiced writing like adolescent youth practice masturbation, in secret, behind locked doors. I wrote poetry in the age of mummified, deep-seated nationalisms, in the era of dictatorships, which to this day open the gates of their prisons to poets, writers, and students of freedom. I wrote poems carrying my heart on my hands, wandering between minds. And I must tell you that I come from a country that tears itself apart, a country on fire, consumed by flames, or, to be more precise, what you see in front of you now is that what is still untouched after my flight from these fires. Here and now, in Berlin, I must admit, I carry many scars and fires within me that have not yet been extinguished. Today, I do what I can to extinguish the fires that I carry through poetry and literature. They are still tearing through my body and my lyrical landscape. In Vienna, I wrote the following lines. Perhaps I was a poet ablaze with flames. Missiles rain down from the pencil with which I write. Or perhaps in a pub in Salzburg, I wrote a line of poetry like an explosive device, was too gentle to bear my pain. And the wounds in my odes and the clamor of my words, so it was decided to deport me to the city that was farthest outside the city, Berlin. Today, Berlin has given me its multicolored alphabet without asking me about my nationality or religion, without entering a poetic discourse with me. It has opened the gates to poetry, rhymes, and verse, flung me onto white paper, settling down at the end of the verse to wait for the finished poem. I do not believe in nationalisms, so I am a poet without national affiliation or affiliations of any other kind. When I was a child in primary school, we had 2 hours a week of lessons in national studies. I often tried to bunk off that class, which severely strained my nerves and put me under so much pressure I nearly exploded. But it wasn't just about this subject and the catastrophes. It dealt with, but also the uniforms we had to wear, in which we looked like little soldiers. And we had to chant military songs of which we didn't understand a word. When I then studied law at the University of Damascus, I organized many poetry evenings, literature events, and readings. Once, when I distributed advertisements and invitations for one of my poetry evenings, I had the following short verse printed on it: "This nationalism is a compliant whore." It was an excerpt from one of the political poems I was planning to read, if I was to be allowed to do so. As a result, my poetry evening was naturally not approved for so-called security reasons, and I was called into offering to neither write or not perform poetry at the University of Damascus and its associated cultural sites. Therefore, dear friends, I am a poet without national affiliation or identity, or, put it even more clearly, I have gone into exile without any affiliation. Berlin has given me a new identity. It has propelled me to the outer limits of astonishment. Berlin has allowed me to immerse myself in its freedom, which wears me out, as I am a poet who was never exposed to such a vast measure of freedom. Berlin has given me more freedom than I was capable of missing. For me today, Berlin means a home that represents me, a national affiliation that resembles me, a constitution that protects me, an unlimited treasure of rhymes and poems. Damascus, on the other hand, is a homeland that I love because I grew up there, as the country of my ancestors, but where unfortunately I do not possess the privileges I enjoy in Berlin today, such as a national affiliation that resembles me and a constitution that protects me. I believe that poets and writers of our times, whether Muslim or Jewish, do not require a national identity behind which to shield themselves, but should, on the contrary, detach themselves from any such notion and interweave their identity into other nationalities. Perhaps we already have a global identity or nationality here in Berlin. Hasan Ze Alnoon.
Thank you very much, Hasan. And now we will move to Hila Amit, our participant. She was born in Israel in 1985 to a Jewish family with Iranian and Syrian ethnic origins. She studied creative writing at the Tel Aviv University and holds a PhD in the field of gender studies from SOAS, University of London. Her first fiction book, Moving On from Bliss, Tel Aviv, Amovet Publisher, 2016, was awarded the Israeli Minister Culture Prize for debut authors. She is one of the curators of this event and also one of the founders of ANU, Jews and Arab Writing in Berlin. She's my colleague and my friend. And please, Hila, you can start.
On most days, cold and warm, I sit at my desk in Friedrichshain and I try to write. The Hebrew letters stare back at me from the screen, black on a white surface. From the window, I see green trees, big apartment buildings, European buildings. The sky has a European shade as well, mostly gray. I was used to the sharp, dazzling light of the Middle Eastern sun. I've survived 7 years here. My skin has lost its dark brown color. It faded away. I am now a mixture. The heart and mind are Middle Eastern, the writing as well, but the body, its skin color, its movements, always wrapped in too many layers. The body has changed. I feel out of place many times. I want to belong, and still, I have yet to write a single sentence, a single story, a single character that is German, that is of Berlin. All my characters are connected to Israel. All the characters speak is Hebrew. Arabic, however, is always crawling into my text, pushing itself into the atmosphere, in between the words my protagonist speaks. Arabic haunts my literature. You would assume that by now it would be German that will have this impact on my writing. You would assume that by now the streets I will be describing would be of Kreuzberg or Neukölln. But no, they are still the streets of Jaffa and Tel Aviv, of Haifa and Al-Fachem. Israelis and Palestinians are trouble in my literature. Even though I'm no longer a resident of that country, I do not have health insurance there, no address, no home. It is hard to live behind your mother tongue, my Hebrew. It would be hard to stop writing in Hebrew. I do understand that. But with Arabic, well, I thought it would be a different story. It is not my native tongue. It should have been, but it was not. I was denied it. I was deprived of the mother language of my father, as I was refused his name. My father's last name was Abbas. When he was 18, he went to the Ministry of Interior Affairs in Israel and changed his name to Amit. The two names share a letter and nothing more, the Ein, which exists in Arabic and Hebrew alike. Many words, structures, semantic fields exist in Arabic and Hebrew alike. That is why upon learning Arabic, it felt like swimming, but just in a different sea. The movements were the same. The breath I took were of the same nature. It was just that the body of water was different. Sometimes colder, sometimes warmer, wavy. It was a bigger body of water. It stretched on the world map in my head on so many territories, while the Hebrew was limited to such a small piece of land. Today I know that Hebrew has a link to German as well. Artificial link. No, sorry, it's not really artificial. There are links that have been built, like foundations set in the ground for the building to be built. But that metaphor is also not perfect, because Hebrew existed side to side with German for many years. But the German Jews who wanted to create a more modern and vivid language based their intervention and their creation on the German. It was a great endeavor, a great project. It is taught until these days in schools in Israel. The reinvention of the Hebrew language. I wish the project would have been different. That Hebrew would strive from Arabic, that it would merge into the language that surrounded it, the Arabic of Syria and Kharat el-Yahud, the Arabic of Baghdad, of Cairo, the Arabic of Gaza and Haifa. But those links have been shattered by national projects, by hate, by separation. We asked the authors of this panel to think about their literature. Are they writing still and within the national project they have left, or are they writing from a new project, a diasporic project? I cannot fully embark on a new project when I feel I was denied an older project. I feel we need to do some healing, to bring back the Arabic and Hebrew together before we can set out and create new projects, before we can develop a new imagination. I want to embark on a new project from a stable ground, a ground that is not bleeding, a ground that does not miss the past possibilities, but live through them. I want to sit in a desk in Kharat el-Yahud in Damascus and look at the synagogue my uncle went to for his bar mitzvah. I want to visit Beirut, where my grandmother used to go for her summer vacation. I want to write in a language that belongs to the Middle East in its open nature. I wish our literature can still connect and hold on to something that was there before, that is now long gone, that I miss without having had it. It's such a strange feeling. It haunts me. I always felt strange and out of place in Israel too. It's not the same Ausländerisch feeling I have here, but it shares similarities. It is the different peace of mind, how you occupy the space you walk. I remember that when I was working in Jaffa, I was always a bit proud when kids in the supermarket would ask me a question in Arabic. I was proud that I passed as an Arab. It was strange because it was passing as something that I have within me without trying. The hard part was that I could not share this feeling of being proud with anyone. For the Jews that surrounded me, being an Arab or a Palestinian was an insult. I don't have much time here, but maybe I can touch upon this in the discussion, but I want to think through queer theory and queer ideas, because I see in the queer option something that can help navigate through these national projects and their consequences on people's life. Queerness, or the feeling of being out of one's place, out of one's body, language, territory, is exactly what I want to hold on to when I write. I search the passings in a language that is not mine, in a street I have not visited, in a sea I have not swam in. I want my literature to move between the Arabic and the Hebrew in a way that will make the reader lose their balance. I want my readers to feel out of place. I want their hegemonic feelings to be taken away from them. I want the national project of Zionism and the Jewish state to be fractured through and within these moments of readings, of passing through my text. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we are moving fast to our fourth participant, Asaf Dvori. Asaf Dvori is a poet, an editor. He's the author of Blueprints for a Family, published in Israel in December 2019 by Olam Chadash Publishers. And please, Asaf, you can. And he's also from Iraqi origin, from Baghdad.
Not from Baghdad, but yes.
Yeah, from Basra, right?
Yeah, Basra and Amar.
Yeah.
In his book, Imagined Communities, states Benedict Anderson that although people like to say that the times of nationality and nationalism is over, or that nationalism is old, undeveloped, not to say degenerate form of social organism, the reality is quite plain. And the end of the era of nationalism, so long prophesied, is not remotely in sight. Indeed, nationness is the most universally legitimate value in our political life. Almost 40 years later, and nothing had really changed. Al-Qaeda and ISIS, the war in Syria and Yemen, the growth of the right wing in Europe and the US, and well, the last election at the US, are good examples for that. And in a more personal level, if to refer to our life in Berlin, I think that most of the Auslanders like me would be familiar with the question and repeatedly questioned, where are you from? If you're not lucky enough and you have been born here but you don't look as the German stereotype, like my friend Anas, that you will be asked, no, but really, where are you really from? And I can go further with those kind of questions. But this mechanism of communication, where hierarchy within German states, as well as the hierarchy separates us as foreigners. Sorry, I'll start again. This mechanism of communication, where people implying to state the hierarchy from foreigners and locals, as well as the inner hierarchy within German states, is another constantly reminder of nationalism and the role it has in our life. It's so deep that I think all the foreigners that I've speak to ask the same question as well. So if to answer the question that stands at the middle of this panel today, no, I don't think nationalism is over. On the contrary, it's here to stay. It's changing and developing, but nevertheless, it's here to stay. And therefore, it is better to stop fantasizing about the death of nationalism and try to change it from its core. To go back to Anderson's book, he proposes in what he calls an anthropological spirit, a definition of a nation. It is imagined political community, and imagined in both inheritedly, limited, and subverged. Because of the short time that I have, I'll just take the moment to state what is pretty clear, but is important to our role as writers. That is, nation is imagined, since the members of even the smallest nation have never known most of their fellow members, meet them, or even hear of them. Yet, in the minds of each lives the image of their communions. A few months ago, I was asked by a literary magazine to answer the simple question, what is literature? Well, I was stupid enough to agree to that. It was really a hell of a question, and I really hated myself for a long time for agreeing for this task. But if to be honest, it brought me back to the reason I started reading, to the way I read and write literature. In other words, at least for me, literature, like love, is that moment towards the other, a glimpse into a possible, imagined form of life, life that stands in front of me, in front of us, even if for a short moment. Because what is reading or writing if not a desire and the attempt to stand, even in an utter failure, inside of the shoes, clothes, and sometimes even the flesh of the one standing next to us? No, such a way of reading is for sure not simple, inherent or even voluntarily action. Giving up your prior knowledge, impressions, opinions, thoughts, and the most hidden fears, as well as delaying them, is not an easy or comfortable thing to do. The disabilities of the writers, the limitation of the gaze, attention, gender, as well as the limitation of language and imagination are always there, always standing in the threshold, threatening to vanish the other figure, the other's language. There are times where I fail. Sometimes it feels as most of the times. But there are times it is possible, at least for me, even for a moment, to listen, to hear, to learn, and to make room for the other. Being an immigrant is the shittiest position to be in sometimes. The pain of the two fatherlands, if your language skills are good enough, or in the constant reminder of the abyss of miscommunication, if you are like me. The place where you can write poems in one language, but not being capable of building one decent sentence in another language, is my daily bread. Deleuze and Guattari wrote about this in their book Kafka Towards a Minor Literature. There they asked, how many people live in a language that is not their own, or no longer, or not yet? The problems that they see is the problem of immigrants, and especially of their children, the problem of minorities, the problem of minor literature. So, if to conclude, how and what is our responsibility as writers in the diaspora? I think that for me at least, our job as writer, as I suggest, is to change the subject of our imagined communities, to widen the possibilities of a subject, to create a language and literature that gives voices to ones like us that don't fit into the basic constellation of nationalism, as it is right now, to give language to those who are not being seen, that are constantly denied of their subjectivity. Imagination is one of the basic tools one uses when writing. But it is also safe to say that literature is a sword, a double-edged sword. As Anderson states forward in his book, literature and literary canon have been used through the years to build the notion of community that is called nationalism. It has been a cooperated figure in the power and the structure of power. Hence, if we want to change it, we need to continue building literature, our own literature, a diasporic one. Literature that is the sister of the literature Deleuze and Guattari talk about when they speak about minor literature. Literature that will capture and describe the basic power relation between the hegemony and other minorities. It's a long way ahead, and it's just have been started. And as Beckett once said, ever tried, ever failed, no matter, try again, fail better. Will you join us?
Thank you very much, Asaf. So I think we heard in all of the words of our panelists and participants the liminal notion of trying to include inside of one body two identities that cannot live together in one body, which is also the category of a hybrid identity. Mariam told us about her trip to Alexandria and trying to figure out what is belonged to her from Egypt, and when she coming back to Europe, and that she cannot be without the other identities, and also she gave us a glimpse of what is Egyptian identity towards the surrounding of Egypt's borders. We heard from Hasan. Also, on one hand, he doesn't want national affiliation. On the other hand, he sees Berlin as a city that gives him some kind of constitution and defends him. So he belongs to her, but still Damascus belongs to him, and he doesn't want to leave Damascus. We heard from Hila. She looks at the window and she doesn't belong to Berlin, but still she belongs to the language, and she wants to emerge from the past, for the Arab Jewish past into the present, from forgettable identities that once were so vivid, the life in Baghdad and Gaza and Damascus of Jews and Arabs living together without thinking about nationalism that divides them. So she doesn't want to leave these forgotten identities. She wants to hold them and bring them back to the present in order to create a future. And we heard from Asaf, which is also on a liminal point of view of the double sword of the immigrant that always fall into the abyss of miscommunication, but still from this abyss he has an imagination of diasporic literature that changed the nationalism from inside without canceling or ignoring it or thinking that it's already ruined. And still, I want to be more specific. We are here now in Berlin. We are Middle Eastern, and we create a Middle East poetics that it doesn't really belong fully to the Middle East, because we are here now in front of the Wannsee, and maybe we don't know what's happening right now in Egypt or in Damascus or in Gaza or in Tel Aviv, and but on the other side, we are not fully connected to Berlin, because we're not fully here. We're speaking in English. We're not mastering the German language, and maybe also we're not being understood fully to our specific identities from our birth cities. So what is the specific of this Middle Eastern poetics? And I'd like you to all to answer, maybe starting with Mariam, if you have an answer. Or you can say also that you also don't believe in it, if you, whatever.
And what exactly?
What is this Middle Eastern poetics that grows here in Berlin, that is not fully connected to the Middle East, but still part of it, and not fully connected to Berlin culture, but still part of it?
Mm-hmm. Well, it definitely exists. I can't kind of deny its existence. I'm not in the space of that. I don't think anyone is in the position of doing that. But I think it's, even to me, I mean, both of these poems, they are about the Middle East to some part, or to the big part, but they're still from like an outsider position, and I feel this is what the Middle Eastern literature in Berlin is like. It's like giving this, it's like taking a view at something but from afar, which can be very helpful, because also we're not doing it at afar as people who don't belong to it, because we do belong to it. We have been there before, we've lived there before, we know what it is to be there and to be that. But now we're also like learning or tapping into being something else. And I think it's a very distinct kind of Middle Eastern literature. I don't think you can compare it to literature that stems from writers and poets who have only ever lived in the Middle East. But yeah, it's like an entity of its own. It's kind of like we are. We're an entity that lies between two, and so is our literature.
So it gives you a perspective, this point of view of being far away from, from both cultures.
Yeah.
Interesting.
أريد أن أقول في البداية لهيلا أنا ولدت في مدينة دمشق القديمة. هذه المدينة التاريخية التي تحدثت عنها، هناك حي بالقرب من حي من المكان الذي أعيش فيه اسمه حي اليهود. عندما كنت صغيرا كنت ألعب وأذهب وأشاهد ذاك الحي. وأنت الآن تشتاقين أو تودين الذهاب لدمشق عندما جلست في برلين تتكلمين. تذكرت لا تحزني كثيرا لأنني أنا أيضا الآن أشتاق لدمشق، أشتاق لتلك الحارات.
Give a one and
Yeah.
to translate.
Is this working? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'd like to take up what Hila just finished by saying, by mentioning that I grew up in Damascus, in the old part in the old town of Damascus, and very close to the neighborhood I used to live in. I grew up in. There was also what we used to call the Jewish quarter, which, from what I understood, you mentioned in what you said, and you were kind of longing to. And when I was little, we used to play there. We used to go around there, and as you mentioned that you were longing now to be able to go there, to long there. While you're here in Berlin, for me it's almost the same. I now long to be able to go back there, sitting here in Berlin.
ربما سنعود يوما أنا وأنت إلى تلك المدينة، لا أعلم. أتمنى ذلك.
And maybe one day you and me can go both back there together. I don't know. I hope so.
أما بالنسبة للموضوع الذي طرحه علي ماتي، أريد أن أقول هنالك بعض القصائد التي بدأت بكتابتها في دمشق في الشرق الأوسط وأكملتها هنا في برلين. هذا يعني أن الشعر عندما تكتب الشعر السياسي، أنا أكتب شعر سياسي كثيرا، تختلف الروح بين مدينة وأخرى. أما عندما تكتب الحب لا أعتقد أنه يختلف، الرومانسي أو لقد لاحظت اختلاف كبير بين لغتي الشعرية في الشرق الأوسط أو في دمشق ولغتي الشعرية هنا في برلين. ضعفت لغتي الشعرية في برلين.
But now to get back to the suggestion or the subject you suggested and the question you asked, Mati, I'd like to say that, well, I mean, there are certain poems which I started writing when I was still back in Damascus and which I only completed once I'd arrived here in Berlin or in Germany. And I found that since I write a lot of political poetry, there isn't such a big difference. There is a big difference, and when you experience the spirit of the place you're actually staying in, it has a huge impact on the way you write in the political sphere. But when it comes to the romantic poetry and to writing about love, there the spirit of the exile doesn't have such a big impact on the language I use. And I feel now that there's a huge difference in my poetic language, that I've actually my poetic instrumentarium has become a lot less rich here now.
Wow.
لماذا؟ قد تسألني لماذا؟ كما تحدثت في كلمتي، كما تحدث مارتن، هنا في برلين أعتقد بأنني أمتلك الحرية أكثر مما يجب علي أن أمتلكها. هنا لدي حرية كثيرة، أما عندما كنت في دمشق كنت محاصر وكنت ملاحق وكنت معتقل، وكانت كلمتي قوية أو تخرج من المعاناة. أما هنا في برلين أستطيع أن أجلس عند بحيرة التيجل أو فانفي وأكتب مع الطيور والحمام. لا معاناة.
Or maybe I'd rather put it the way it's become weaker in some sense. I mean, and there you might ask, why is that the case? Well, because when I was back in Damascus, I was prosecuted, I was arrested, I didn't have the freedom, as I pointed out also in my intervention I read out to you. I didn't have the freedom I possess here now in Berlin, and that was why the words I then wrote were in a way much stronger. While when I sit here, it has become weaker in the sense that I have the full freedom I've never been used to when I sit here in the Tegel Lake or the Wannsee on the lakeshore. Well, I can write and be fully relaxed and have doves and birds flying around me, and that makes the language I write in weaker.
But just I want to maybe take in what Mariam said. We'll have time, but Mariam said that it gives a perspective. Maybe it's a power to have a perspective from far away.
نخمل bitte.
Yeah, Mariam said that she has a perspective on the Middle East and Egypt living here. And so, is it a power to have a perspective, not a weakness?
نعم. هي في الحقيقة ليست نقطة ضعف. هي نقطة ضعف ذاتية مع أصدقاء وأهل لي هناك في دمشق. لماذا؟ أنا أستطيع أن أكتب ما أريد وبالقوة التي أريد، ولكن ماذا تمكن أن تقدم القصيدة أو الكلمة وأصدقائي وأخوتي في المعتقلات أو تحت التراب الآن، تحت القنابل وتحت الضرب. لذلك أنا أستطيع أن أكتب ما أريد، ولكن أنا أشعر بضعف ما أكتبه أمام تضحيات أصدقائي أو أهلي أو الشعب الذي ما زال تحت الضرب.
Well, I wouldn't actually call it a weakness in that sense. What I meant is more like, then of course I can write as strong as I want, and my language itself hasn't become weaker. But the question is, when I write something here, it can be in the strength I want it to be in my poem, in my lyrical writing. But how much it's more a weakness I feel towards my family and my relatives and my friends and the people I've left back there in Damascus, which is what do the words I write here and whatever strength mean to them while they're still suffering, they're still arrested, they're being prosecuted, they're suffering under the bombardment and so on and so forth. So how much that's something I feel on a personal level that I feel it's too weak. And of course I can write in whatever strength I want, but how much does that mean, and does it really express the strength of what they are suffering back there and what they're committing by means of the people I've left back there and their sacrifices?
Can I say something to that? I think, to me, it's... I don't think you can really compare how I see... Like, you can't really compare our situations because my country is not war-torn. Yeah. Hopefully, not ever. But this is not denying the suffering that my people face, but it's still not as powerful as it is, like the kind of suffering is when you're in a war-torn zone. And also, so I have the privilege of that. I have the privilege of being at a viewpoint and taking this thing, watching over this country with a perspective, because this country is doing relatively well to a lot of its neighboring countries. So I think this is a privilege that I have. And also, I think this is how I perceive it, and I perceive it differently than he does, because I was never a writer before coming here. When I left, I was 18. I was still super young. I was always a huge fan of poetry. I was this freak in my class that used to always listen to poems and not songs, and everyone was like, "What the fuck are you doing?" So that was definitely had always been a part of me, poetry, but it's not something I thought I was capable of creating until I came here and I don't know, just one night found myself doing it. To be honest, I don't know how it evolved. But yeah, exactly. But I don't even have the comparison. I can't say, oh, this was me as a writer there and this is me as a writer now. It's just like
understand.
now. This is all there is.
Let's continue before I'll comment on the things.
Do you want to maybe ask another question?
No, I want to hear you also. Asaf,
I'll make it short as possible.
please. No, we have time.
I first want to ask in a personal level or what we do here. This is referring your question.
You asked me if it's on a personal level. That's a
You
question.
asked me about my experience, or
Yeah,
you
your
asked me
experience.
as a group.
Now, on your experience, what is the Middle Eastern poetics here? And is there one?
I'm not sure there is a Mediterranean literature. I think that in a wide sense, we sit here and we have been able to sit together, which we don't get a chance because of nationalism in our countries. It's not allowed, it's denied, and we have the chance to just come here, sit, and exchange ideas. This is something that would never happen there. But I think that on a personal level, everybody spoke about it. I think going or immigrating is being locked down in your body. For the first time in Israel, I passed as an Ashkenazi Jew. I'm white enough because of my grandmother, and everybody think that I am one of the elite, that I'm okay.
Ashkenazi, it's European Jew, so I have to just...
And here, from all over, especially when I grew up my beard and it goes wild, I look the way I am, which is an Arab Jew. And I know how it is to be an Arab in Germany. I know the curse you get, I know the awful sentences you get when you ride on the train from strangers. Just have the feeling they can tell you, oh, girl, where you came from, or es gab gerade zu viel Flüchtlinge in Berlin, and they pointing at you. So I think how to feel how the other feels. And I think for me as a writer, it changed it. My parents were immigrant. They were denied of their identity in Israel. I am an immigrant. I needed to immigrate to finish my book and to write about them. And in a personal level, it changed me, but it made me a whole. I was always in this feeling that I'm misfitting the situation, always. It's one of the basics experience I have in life. So this is why I enjoy it. I have the privilege to sit here and talk about it.
Thank you.
I think the answers we had were very interesting. I'll just add like a very small comment that I think I feel like I'm proud of being an Ausländer here, and I'm taking that as a powerful moment, and that is, it hasn't led yet to a Middle Eastern poetic, but I think it could, like that we can, like coming from a country where I was part of the majority in a way, like becoming a minority gives you a different perspective on things, and using the languages that I speak here, I feel we have a potential to develop something unique and something new.
What is it? What is the characters of this something unique? That's what I want to reach into, the characterization of it, of this new thing that can be born here. What is your imagination when you imagine it? And I know that we talked about it. And
I don't know how to really put my finger on it, but I think there's something special in, we're walking the streets of this new country, and we come with all these memories of the streets of our previous countries, and we are walking here, and we occupy the space in a different way. We're totally not German in the way we walk, in the way we speak, in the way we push ourselves, in the way we think, and I think that I'm already having an impact on people from here, right? So I think we are already creating an impact, and we are also kind of grasping something from the environment. So there is a hybrid and a new thing that is developing. And I think it would take a few years to figure out exactly where it's going, but I can see it happening, and I like this new thing.
We are not by accident. We are three Jews with Arab past in the Middle East who cannot go to the places where the families grew up. My family came from Mashhad in Iran and Baghdad and Damascus. where once Jews can go between Palestine and these countries by foot or with train, and today they cannot. And it's funny enough, the Ashkenazi Jews can go back to Berlin where the Holocaust was happening, but we cannot go to the places where our family buried for hundreds of years. And in your lecture, in your statement, Hila, you mentioned the power of our Arab-Jewish history as a ground for fertile ground for a new creation here in Berlin. Do you feel that even this experience and our other events of Anu or your ability to speak Arabic and to pass as Arabic also with your Arabic, Hila speaks really well Arabic. Last event she was interviewed by a Syrian channel, and so you have the ability to be a Hebrew teacher and also to speak Arabic well. And so do you imagine yourself as that in this reality you can also recreate the past and towards a new future?
I'm a very pessimistic person, so I don't know if I could, or if we could, but I think what we are creating here is the important part, yeah? Like, I think even just sitting here and having this conversation and, you know, Hasan hearing me talk about Harat and Yehud and something happens, like, that is what I look for. And that are the important parts, and getting that out also in when we write and getting that published and having more people reading and experiencing, that is my aim.
Okay, we have still time, so I'll let you, we can either do two things. We can comment to each other, or we can also give 5 more minutes to Hasan to read his poem about Damascus, so you can decide if you want. If you want to say something now, so raise your hand and you can speak more, or first we give.
Do we have questions from the audience?
No, we will have time for that still.
Okay.
So Hasan, you can read your poem about Damascus.
Yeah, okay.
And we will continue with the discussion.
Okay.
Of the poem?
Martin?
Okay.
But it's in the okay. The ones who, if you want to hear the translation, it's in the. Will be uploaded to Sprache.de, and you can read it, and also see other materials, literary materials of Hasan. Sprache.de.
Okay. Ich lese 2 Strophen
Okay.
und wir können nochmal.
Super.
Ja. قصيدة بعنوان برلين المنفى والوطن. ربما كنت شاعراً مشتعلاً تتهاوى القذائف من قلم الرصاص الذي أكتب به، أو لربما كتبت في إحدى بارات سالزبورغ بيتاً من الشعر المفخخ، أو كان المناخ الشعري في حي شتيفنبلاتس أرق من أن يتحمل أحزاني وجراح قصائدي وضجيج مفرداتي، فقرروا ترحيلي لأبعد مدينة خارج المدينة. عندما طلبوا مني مغادرة فيينا إلى برلين، لم أكن أعرف أن القصائد والقوافي والمفردات تنتظرني على الطريق السريع، ولم يخطر لي أن للشعر في برلين عالمه وقانونه وبرلمانه الخاص. لملمت بعض أوراقي ودموعي ودخلت المدينة، ودخلت برلين ودموعي تبحث عن دمشق. تمددت في سمائها كغيمة ماطرة، وأمطرتها شعراً وحباً ودموعاً. برلين، أتيتك من أرض الجنون، أتيتك من أرض الجنون، باحثاً عن وطن أسند ظهر قصائدي عليه، وأستنشق القوافي والمفردات به، وأكتب فيه بكل اللغات، وأملأ كل السطور، وأتناقش في مقاهيه بيني وبين حروفي بصوت عال.
Thank you. So I have a new question for all of you. On one hand, there's if I'll continue with the idea of the Middle Eastern poetics, there is the negative freedom. So because we are seen as Arabs, and we are Arabs, and there is the racist side maybe of the German society who has Islamophobia or other racism, and so Asaf mentioned this is a part of his feelings and things that happened to him. So we have to unite against it, and maybe that is one part of the poetics of the Middle East, because we identify as a part that doesn't, as a relation to this nationalism, so we have to unite against it. But I want to talk less about this negative freedom, but to talk about more about what is the positive side of it, to maybe continue from the idea that we have a way. I also talked about it in my statement, that we for one moment we are out of the Middle East, and so we have one moment to imagine another Middle East from our, for instance, the idea that we are walking in the EU, and we cannot walk freely in the Middle East. I mean, maybe you can walk freely in Egypt, but still Egypt is not like it's not like the freedoms that you have, it's not the same of the freedoms that you have here. Of course, in Syria, we don't have to explain what's happening in the Assad regime. In Israel, we don't have also full freedoms. We cannot go to Gaza, which is only, it's close to, it's in Israeli control, or the Gaza Strip, and also the West Bank. We cannot go freely, which is inside of Israel and in occupation right now. So, but we are here, and we're meeting between ourselves, and in this meeting, we're creating a new map. So maybe from this new map, we can create a new literature, because maps are not only what we saw in the atlas or in the website, but it's also the stories of our people. And the story of our people is also what we bring here. And stories create a map. So maybe this new map is a new characterization of this Middle Eastern poetics. Please elaborate on it. Asaf, you want to?
I can start. I'm not sure that I have this. I'm a bit like Hila. I'm also a pessimist. But I think that my project has nothing to do, my Middle Eastern project is nothing to do with literary here, but more to the daily life. I work in a kindergarten, in a kita in Germany, and one of my colleagues is a Palestinian. We share pretty much the same name for the kids because they are not familiar with our name, and I'm called Asaf, he's called Anas, which to the German kids clings pretty much the same. So they switch between us. And today is the Kindertagrecht, the day of the...
Children's Day.
Yeah, rights of the children.
Yeah.
And we did some work. One of the two rights that we took was the right of any kid that had been fled from any occupation land or war zone to get his own rights and to preserve it. And we sat with the kids and we explained our stories. I talked about the moment my father needed to flee Iraq alone without any family and go on a trailer and cross Greenland and then reach up after a 17th day and live 5 days with no other family member. Anas gave his story, and we do it on a basically level. So things, I think on a daily basis, are changed. We speak and bring ourselves. We sit and sing our songs, and we switch some figure of speech that we use both in Hebrew and both in Arabic. So this is my optimistic Middle Eastern corner.
You spoke about the will of literature to go again to reach the other, and you failing to reach the other. But you quoted Beckett as the idea of trying again and again. But then when I'm asking you, you suddenly leave it to the personal, but still you have this kind of idea of literature that reach the other. And even in your words now, you reach the other while sharing the storytelling of Palestinian and Israeli together.
Yes, but nevertheless, it depends not only about you and the way you treat it, it's the way others read you.
Okay.
I mean, the first lesson that you learn, I'm sorry that I'm bringing my pessimistic side
it's
again,
okay.
but the first
It's
thing
important.
that you learn as an immigrant is no matter, like, you studied literature, you thought that knowing all the literature in the world will help you, but once the eyes they blick on you, then you're just a foreigner who has not a capacity to speak a proper language or the local language, and therefore you're retarded sometimes, and you're being treated as retarded. So I think Fanon speaks about it clearly and better than I do, but you have been judged for the way you look all the time, no matter what you do, no matter what you know. And this is a huge reminder that is pessimistic. And you can try to get out of your skin, you can try to get out of your corner and to say, I will do my act, or I will listen to the other. But I do it also. I'm sadly also having those racist behaviors. I'm not different from the others.
Okay. Thank you. Maybe we'll also hear the others, so we have still time to talk. Mariam, you want to also elaborate on it?
Yeah, I think with a literature that stems from us, like us being Middle Eastern people who live here, I don't think we need to create a new map like you described, because I feel like the maps that were already created were so problematic. I feel like it's like I'm traumatized. I don't want to see them up again. And especially because I really feel strongly towards the word Middle East. I really hate it. I so despise it. And for a while, I was really rejecting it to the extent I would never say it. Just like never. It's like, this is a colonial term. I don't have to do anything with it. It does not exist. Middle of what? Eastern to where? It doesn't make sense. It's such a relative thing. And it's like, why does it exist?
Yeah.
I want to get rid of it. But then I realized I can't address it if I don't recognize it. And I do want to address it. I want to deconstruct it. So I think the kind of literature we need to be creating is one that addresses it, not necessarily creates a new one, just addresses it in a way that would finally, maybe someday at the end of the line, deconstruct it and decolonize it. But just like denying its existence is not a decolonization of it, you know? So I think this is what I hope the literature that gets created in the West these days by people who come from the Middle East does, because this is, I feel what we really need to do is just like deconstruct all the shit.
Great. Hila?
I kind of totally agree with Mariam. I really don't have anything to add.
Hasan?
أريد أن ألخص رأيي بكلمتين.
So I'd like to sum up in 2 words.
Yeah.
لدي مثال هنا وهو المفكر إدوارد سعيد، أعتقد أن الجميع يعرفونه. إدوارد سعيد عرف المثقف المغترب ب3 كلمات.
Okay, I'm going to come up with a quote by Edward Said. I guess all of you are very well aware of who he was and what he said. But he also summarized the characterization of an intellectual who lives in Western exile with 3 words.
اللامنتمي، الهاوي، والهامشي.
So he is non-affiliated, he is an amateur, and he is marginal.
أنا أريد هنا أن أنتقي كلمة اللامنتمي وأتحدث عنها. يجب على المثقف أن يتحلل من انتماءاته والخروج من نطاق الدائرة المحيط بها والتي تهيمن عليه، بحيث يستطيع أن يرى ما لا يرى.
So, and I focus specifically on only one of these 3 aspects, which is the idea of non-affiliation. Since a person who wants really to have a comprehensive view has to get rid of all his prior affiliations and belongings and all the things he might have been belonging to, so he can see what has so far been invisible.
وأنا برأيي على المثقف المغترب اليهودي كان أو المسلم أو العربي بشكل عام الذي يدخل برلين عليه أن يدخل إليها بلا انتماءات، لأن برلين تربة خصبة وهي مدينة قديمة جدا ولها تاريخ، وأنا أعشق المدن التي لها تاريخ ولها ذاكرة.
And I think any person who goes into exile and an intellectual who goes into exile, be it of Jewish origin, of Arab origin, or Muslim origin, and comes to Berlin, has to get rid and liberate completely from any previous affiliations. Because Berlin as such, being a very old and city of great historic tradition, is a fertile ground. And I personally, I love cities with these historic aspects and with memories.
قد لا أتكيف مع المدن الحديثة والتي لا تاريخ لها ولا ذاكرة لها. برلين متحف في الهواء الطلق. وأنا هنا في هذا المبنى المنتدى الأدبي أعتقد أشعر بالفخر بوجودي هنا لأن هذا المبنى أيضا له تاريخ وله ذاكرة جيدة.
And I personally do not feel capable of integrating and adopting to a city or place which doesn't have such a history. I feel incapable of adopting to modern cities which do not carry such memories. While I feel in Berlin is that it's really an open-air museum with a huge richness of historical background. And I feel exactly the same here when I sit in this literary colloquium Berlin, where I feel very proud of being able to be here because it's also this building briefs history and memories.
أستطيع أن أشم التاريخ والشعر والأدب هنا.
I can literally smell literature and history and memories when I sit here.
Thank you. We heard all the different points of view here, and we have to go also to get some outside questions from the internet crowd that's now watching us, and Simon, our internet correspondent, will give us few of the questions that the crowd is writing in comments and in the Stratsprache and the Air live stream.
Yeah, hello. I gathered some of the questions, and there's like recent comments. The first is by Tal Hever-Chybowski, who is also going to participate in the panel later. And he says to identify most with Mariam Rasheed's difficulties in giving a clear-cut personal answering to the question of nationalism kaputt. And his suggestion is to problematize the term nationalism by unearthing its non-deterministic history, or in other words, to say nationalism is not an essential or frozen concept. And he says that the rejection of Hasan Ze Alnoon to today's mummified nationalism points exactly to this. Then there is another question by Nitzan, who is a PhD candidate from the Hebrew University and is living in Berlin currently, and he has a question to Hila. And he asked, you've written in the past that the emerging Hebrew culture in Berlin effectively severs the ties between the Hebrew language and the state of Israel. In other words, you acknowledge the agency Israelis in Berlin have in reclaiming and reshaping their mother tongue and culture. From listening to your words just now, it seems that your opinion may have changed since writing that article. Could you perhaps elaborate on that? Then there's two more questions, but maybe first this.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think in general there's something about not being in Israel and writing in Hebrew that is already doing something that's kind of undoing the national project or the Zionistic project, right? Because there's something about Hebrew being the language of the Jewish nation and connected to the territory. And then by writing from abroad, we are on one hand, we are saying like there is a Hebrew and vivid like Hebrew culture outside of Israel, which is already a statement, but it's also having that in Berlin, where it was a vivid culture before the establishment of the state, is even, like I find it even more radical because there's so much potential in like, well, me and Mati, we have a dream of establishing a Berlin. So like, again, because it used to be here, yeah, and it used to be, there's a very cool story about Brenner, one of the biggest writers, that he kind of went against the publishers that were sitting in Europe and in Berlin when he wanted to establish a Hebrew publishing in Israel in the 20s, and he couldn't do it because all the money came from these associations in Europe, and we are kind of like in a different situation, right? Like there's all this like money for Hebrew literature from the state of Israel, but we are sitting somewhere else and we are trying to like create something here. So I think there is these two like radical potentials about being somewhere else and still using the language of the nation, but also nationalistic way. I think that when me and Mati or Asaf, when we write, it has nothing to do with Israel, and it has nothing to do with Zionism, but we are using this language. So I think that's like kind of the radical potential there.
I may continue with another comment by Tal Hever-Chybowski, who says to what you said before, Zionist Hebraists whom are claimed to have revived or reinvented Hebrew, such as Eliza Ben Yehuda, were in fact very often philologists of Semitic languages, orientalistically obsessed with Arabic as a paradigm of the renewal of Hebrew. They were also obsessed with the alleged purity of Hebrew as spoken by Arab Jews. Indeed, the erudite Orientalism in the basis of Zionist Hebraism went hand in hand with the emergence of an oppressive and discriminatory Jewish European hegemony vis-à-vis Arab Jews. Maybe instead of imagining an alternative revival of Hebrew on the basis of Arabic as opposed to German, as you suggest, I suggest to acknowledge the oppressiveness of Hebrew's revival myth and reject it altogether. So maybe to give that into the round.
Let's continue with it. It's because it's again about Hebrew. Let's hear more.
Okay,
also
then there's
stuff.
one more
You don't have
question to Hasan by Munahir here, who sent us a mail and asked, maybe your words are now more fit to another public which still needs... Oh, yeah. Yeah, I will write it, say it. Munahir here asks, Hasan, maybe your words are now more fit to another public which you still need to discover, one in the diaspora.
You understand?
فاهم؟ على حسب ما فهمت من السؤال إنه كلماتي موجهة للجمهور القابع في دمشق. على حسب ما فهمت من السؤال.
So I understand from the question.
كلماتي موجهة لجمهور آخر أي الجمهور الذي في الشرق الأوسط أو في دمشق.
So my question is, so my writings and my words are addressed to a public which is still back in Damascus, or was it meant the other way around?
No, in the diaspora, the Syrian that's also exiled.
نعم. أنا أريد أن أقول بأن الشعر الذي أكتبه اليوم أو الأدب هو موجه للجمهور المقيم هنا في أوروبا، لأني أتحدث باسم المستضعفين أو المقهورين في الشرق الأوسط، أحاول أن أوصل صوتهم. طبعا الشعر غير موجه للدمشقيين أو المصريين أو لأنهم يعيشون ويعرفون التجربة جيدا، أحاول أن أشرح فقط.
So no, exactly. That's the point. My poetry today, what I write today, is addressed to public living here in Europe and in Germany, because I'm trying to bring across the voice of those people who are marginalized, who are the weak ones over there. And it's not so much addressing the public in, say, Damascus, in Egypt, because they are aware of what the circumstances they're living in. But I'm trying to get that across to the public here.
Maybe the commentator referred to the exiled one, to the millions of Syrian people that also had to flee Syria.
نعم، من الممكن، ولكن أنا أبحث الآن عن الجمهور الأوروبي بالدرجة الأولى، لأن أصدقائي السوريين أو اللاجئين السوريين يعرفون حجم المعاناة تماما، والشعب السوري في دمشق والعربي بشكل عام يعيش المعاناة. أما الشعب الأوروبي، أصدقائنا الألمان والإنجليز يسمعون ويشاهدون الميديا فقط. هم لا تصلهم الصورة الحقيقية. أما عندما أجلس أنا مع ماتي أو مع هيلا وأتحدث عن معاناتي الشخصية، يأتي التعاطف المباشر والحقيقي.
Well, that would be a possibility too, but I think I'm trying to address more the European public as the Europeans themselves, because, well, my fellow Syrians who have fled with me or have come after me, who are also refugees, they know the suffering that's going on, and the people still back there, they know the suffering, and they know the amount of the suffering. They're still living it and experiencing it by themselves, while the Europeans, be they our German or British or whoever friends of the European nations here, well, the only picture they usually get is from the media, and they don't get the real picture. So I see my role in that and trying to get that across to them. And when I talk to Mati and Hila, for example, I mean, we're trying to get that across also to the public here in Europe.
لذلك أنا أسعى ويوميا أحاول أن أترجم القصائد وأترجم الشعر الذي أكتبه كي يصل إلى الطرف الآخر.
And that's also why I really strive very much in having my poems and my literature being translated on a daily basis so it can really get across to the other side.
Danke.
That were all the questions from the internet for now.
Okay, thank you very much to all participants today, to Mariam, to Hasan, to Asaf, to Hila. And now we will introduce our feature poet. I'm very glad that he's here, Afshin Javadi Torshizi. Let me give you his biography. The poet and civil engineer Afshin Javadi Torshizi, born in 1984 in Khorasan, grew up in Iran and has been living in Germany since autumn 2010. He is currently writing his dissertation at the Technical University of Berlin in the field of energy efficient planning and construction. He already published few books in Germany, and we will hear his poems now as the first featured poet of our symposium. Please, Afshin.
Vielen Dank. Ich werde gerne einige meiner Werke auf Deutsch und eventuell ein Werk auf Persisch, im Persischen vortragen. Ich muss zugeben, das war gar keine einfache Sache, sich als Poet in die Lage eines Präsidenten, Herrn Trump, hineinzuversetzen. Und ich glaube, ich muss auch kein Wort über die iranisch-amerikanische Beziehung verlieren. Also, ziemlich beste Feinde. Wenn ich euch besiegt habe, also sprach der Chorleiter des Kurreigens, feiern werden eure Familienhäuser, ihre Hochzeiten auf dem roten Flächenbrandteppich brennend, tragen die Flammenringe eure Städte tanzend. Witwe werdende Frauen genießen ihre Freiheit. Befreien werde ich dieses Land, ausradieren aus der Weltkarte. Also sprach der Chorleiter des Kurreigens. Sarkastiraner antworten darauf, wenn. Heimat. Meine Herzensstimmung in diesen Tagen, die einer Nachtigall in den Wind gepeitscht, vertrieben aus ihrem Käfig, mit abgeschnittenen Federn, taumelnd wie der Luftballon. Besorgt schaut auf jenen in seinem Rollstuhl und dessen weinendes, hinter dem Luftballon herlaufendes Kind. Hilfe! Luftballon Hand zugewandt in des Windes Hand, befreit. Wir stehen kurz vor die Weihnachten steht kurz vor der Tür und in dieser Zeit frage ich mich immer wieder, warum man eine Tanne abhacken und im Haus aufstellen soll, um zu feiern. Weihnachtsfreude. Eine Tanne gleicht einer Träne auf der Wange der Erde. Nun schmilzt der Abstand zwischen mir und meinem Ich. Fühle mich gleich einer alleinstehenden Tanne auf dem Lande, Stunden vor Weihnachten, wünsche mir diesmal Sternenhimmel an mir selbst, statt Lichterkette. Wir genießen zurzeit eine schwierige Zeit, die Zeit der Gefangenenfreiheit. Erlebte Lieben, lebende Liebhaber sind zu verbergen, aber nicht zu vergessen. Gemeinsame Momente, gemeinsames Mondlicht führt zur Entfesselung meiner Seele, meine Sicherheit bringt mich in eigene Gefangenschaft. Ehre meine Momente mehr, ehre meine Freiheit, Schutz verachtend. Stockende Uhr, stockende Zeit. Trutzig fließende Ringbahnen, ziellos, betrachten sich gegenseitig skeptische Schienen, unglücklich. An Richtlinien gebunden fühlt sich keiner selbsttreu, wohl gar gemütlich. Keiner gibt der Zeit eine Chance, eine Hand, bevor sie sich totschlägt. Über die Armut in Deutschland und im Iran habe ich mir Gedanken gemacht und habe mich in die Lage eines einfachen, armen Vaters hineinversetzt. Dem Brot. Dem Brot, glaube ich, habe es aber nicht. Nie gefragt wurde ich, woran ich glaube, warum wir Gläubige sind, meine Familie und ich, die im Interesse keines Menschenrettungsschirmes auftreten durften. Meine Familie und ich, deren größtes, unerwünschtes Festival das Leben war. Das Wort Würdigung durften meine Kinder lediglich in Schulbüchern lesen und diktierten es stets falsch, interpretierten es dennoch weinend, deutsches stockend, tropfend aussprechen. Plötzlich, Nuschelmann bin ich, Witwe bei jenem Wort, das im ganzen Leben weg von mir geht, getrennt von mir lebt. بنان بنان اعتقاد دارم به آنچه ندارم مهم نبودم که پرسیده شوم از آیینم از آنچه خانواده‌ام بدان مبتلاست خانواده‌ای که نمناک میزیست که چترهای انسان دوستی برایش سترون گریه های نکرده بودند خانواده‌ای بودم به سان اندوهی ژرف که کودکانش ارزشمندی را تنها کلمه‌ای می‌دانستند که در کتاب‌های مدرسه می‌خواندند ناگاه به سان مردی لال مطلق از کلمه‌ای که از من نمی‌گذرد و حیاتش در جدایی از من است خاموش ماندم. Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much, Afshin. And thank you to the participants again, Mariam Rasheed, Hasan Ze Alnoon, Asaf Dvori, Hila Amit. Thank you to Mati Shemoelof who read Hasan's statement. Thank you to Simon who was giving us the question and comments from the crowd. Thank you to Nicola Abbas who are translating Hasan's words. We will be back at exactly 4 o'clock for the second panel. Thank you to all of you watching us until now. So tune again at 4 o'clock. We will be starting the second panel with Omri Ben Yehuda in German and about the literary Middle East in and from Berlin.
And thank you to Mati Shemoelof, our moderator. Mati, we still have 5 minutes, and I suggest that I can read the English version, the translated version of the poem by Hasan.
Yes, please.
That he read about Berlin, because now we have
Yeah.
the time for it. Yeah. Is that okay?
Yeah,
with
it's
you?
okay.
Danke.
Okay.
Vielen Dank, Martin.
Sharafna.
على راسي.
يعطيك العافية.
So, thank you, Afshin. And as it was written in our internet broadcasting, all your poems can be read in the German original, because you write it in German language now, and also in the English translation. So the full program that you read now can be read as a manuscript on our website. Just go to the detailed program site at stadtsprachen.de. And now to Hasan's poem, Berlin, Exile and Home. 1. Perhaps I was a poet ablaze with flames. Missiles rain down from the pencil with which I write. Or perhaps in a pub in Salzburg I wrote a line of poetry like an explosive device. Or the musical atmosphere on Stephansplatz was too gentle to bear my pain and the wounds in my odes and the clamor of my words, so it was decided to deport me to the city that was furthest outside the city, Berlin. 2. When I was asked to leave Vienna and go to Berlin, I did not know that poems, rhymes, and words would be waiting for me on the Autobahn to welcome me. I would not have thought that poetry in Berlin has a world of its own, a constitution of its own, a parliament of its own. I gathered my reluctance, my tears and my written pages, and I moved to the city while my tears continued to seek out Damascus. I rose into the sky above Berlin like a lost cloud. I rained poetry, love, and tears down upon it. Berlin, I came to you from the land of madness, in search of a home against which my poems could rest their back, in which I would inhale rhymes and concepts, in which I would write in all languages, would fill line by line, in whose coffee houses I would argue with myself and my letters, full-throated. 4. Remove me, O Berlin, from the smell of home, broken into pieces like a burst dumpling. Let me be far from its skies, its stars, its clouds, its seas, far from its news reports, the pages of the newspapers. Remove me from all that I had there, from the beasts of war, of death, from the memory of the shackles, the memory of flogging and torture. Enrapture me from their voices, their breaths, their accents and prisons. Hide me, O Berlin, between your two rivers like a stream, and sow me into the tear garden as one tree among many. Between your eyes like a poem, and forgive my foolishness when my letters rattle onto your body like rain. Hide me, O Berlin, at checkpoint Charlie, like all those who once fled from east to west. Now write a new story of the new fugitives leaving Damascus for Berlin, and let the curtain fall over my body. 5. I knock with you, O Berlin, on the doors of Damascus, locked behind and in front of me. I walk along your old, tired streets in search of our occupied house in Damascus. I knock on the doors of all the houses in Prenzlauer Berg, Perhaps my mother will step out of one and draw me inside to her. I was left alone in Berlin, standing tall like the last stone of a fallen wall, proud and steadfast, raising the standard of poetry and freedom, broken with a temporary ID as proof of identity on which my name and address are written, and in brackets, humanitarian asylum. Hasan Ze Alnoon, the English version was made by Joey Balson. Thank you, everybody.